We're going tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house. Burra's words still echo in my mind, calm, casual, like he was talking about selling an old couch. But it wasn't just a house. It was my home, my late husband's dream, the place where I learned to breathe again after life knocked the wind out of me. And hearing my own son say it, without a tremor, without even looking me in the eyes, was the moment something inside me quietly cracked. Eber, I didn't shout. I didn't even cry, not then. I just stood there by the kitchen counter, still holding the mug of coffee I'd poured an hour ago, now cold and bitter, like the air between us. Hebrew, he didn't wait for my reaction. He just kept talking, explaining, justifying, smoothing it all out in that practical tone people use when they've already made up their mind. Eber, it's a great deal, Mom. You don't even go there anymore. The market's crazy right now. It just made sense. Eber. That's how my son talked about selling memories. Abra. My name is Clara T. Thompson. And I raised my son, Evan, on my own, after his father passed away 22 years ago. Back then, we didn't have much. A small apartment, a car that coughed smoke, and a dream we couldn't afford yet. But Evan was a bright boy. He had his father's charm and my stubborn heart. When he was 16, he helped me paint the front porch of that beach house, the one his father and I saved every penny to buy. I can still see the streak of white paint on his cheek, the sunlight catching his grin. Someday, he said, this will be mine to take care of, Mom. Brickery, he kept his word. Aft his word, just not the way I thought he would. After he married Lena, things started to shift. She wasn't a bad woman, at least not at first, pretty, polished, and polite. She had the kind of smile that looked practiced, the kind that hid sharp edges behind white teeth. I tried to like her. I plain the way she barely touched her cup, or the way she glanced around my kitchen like it was too small for her taste. Evan changed after that. He still called me, but our talks got shorter. Less about his day, more about plans, investments, growth. He was building a business, working long hours. And Lena, well, she was managing things. That was the phrase she used whenever something happened that didn't quite sit right. When Evan stopped visiting on weekends, I'm managing things. When my birthday gift came as an e-transfer instead of a visit, we're just so busy managing things. The beach house sat 3 hours away from my home in a quiet little town called Silver Cove. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful. Pale blue shutters, a crooked mailbox, a porch that creaked when you stepped on the third plank. Every summer I'd drive there for a week or two, just me, the sound of waves, and the ghost of the life I once had. Lately, though, Evan had been pushing me to let go. Mom, you could use the money, he'd said last spring. Mom, you could use the money, he'd said last spring. You don't even swim anymore. That house, what he didn't understand. That house wasn't about swimming. It was about surviving. It was the place I learned how to live again without his father. Every nail, every window, every inch of that little home had a piece of me in it. Still, I'd let him talk. I didn't want to argue. The buyers are closing next week. You'll get your cut, of course. My cut, I repeated, like I was some silent business partner instead of the woman who brought him into this world. He must have heard something in my voice because he softened then, the way you talk to a child you think can't understand. Look, it's for the best. We're leaving tomorrow morning to meet the new owners, and I thought you'd want to come one last time, for closure. Closure. That word people use when they want to wrap up someone else's pain neatly and walk away from it. I nodded slowly, forcing a small smile. Of course, I said. One last time. Inside. I already knew something he didn't. He thought he was the one making decisions. But I had been preparing for this, quietly, patiently, ever since I saw the first sign that my son had begun to forget where he came from. He didn't know what I had done a few months ago, and when we got to Silver Cove, he'd find out. The next morning, Evan Airy. Vet early, Too early. I'd barely finished tying my headscarf when I heard the honk of his car in the driveway. Through the curtain, I saw him loading up the trunk, Lena sitting in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone like this was just another errand. I took one last look around my house, the framed photos, the smell of lavender from the candle I always lit before leaving. I placed a folded note under the ceramic bowl on the counter. Just in case. Then I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. "Morning, Mom," Evan said with forced cheer, his voice too bright. "Got everything you need?" "I suppose so," I replied, locking the door behind me. "It's just a house after all." He chuckled awkwardly. "Right, just a house." But Lena didn't even look up. She was busy taking a photo of the car mirror, checking her hair in the reflection. Her nails were painted that deep red I'd always thought looked too sharp for daytime. The drive was quiet. 3 hours of winding roads, scattered audio chatter, and the faint smell of Lena's expensive perfume. I watched the trees blur by and thought about all the times I'd made this trip with my husband, Harold. He'd hum old soul songs, tap the steering wheel and say, "Every mile closer to peace, Clara." Now, sitting in the back seat of my own son's car, I felt every mile closer to something else entirely. Halfway through the trip, Lena finally spoke. "Evan, make sure we stop at that cafe near the pier, okay? I told the agent we'd meet there before closing." Agent, Abe. I turned my head slightly. "Agent? Burker." "Oh," Evan said quickly. "Yeah, the realtor handling the sale. Don't worry, Mom, everything's smooth. You'll get your share wired next week." "My share," I repeated softly. "And what's your share, Evan?" He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Just for a second. We'll talk about that later, okay?" The silence after that was heavy. Even the sound of the tires on the road felt sharp, cutting through the tension. Burke. I turned my gas. Out the window again, pretending to admire the coastline. But inside, my mind was already working, connecting dots, remembering details, keeping calm. You see, months ago, I'd started to notice little things. First, Evan asking me to sign a few maintenance forms for the beach house. He said it was for insurance. I didn't question it, not right away, but I read every line after he left. The document wasn't about maintenance. It was about transfer of partial ownership. I didn't confront him then. Instead, quietly called the county clerk and confirmed the title was still in my name. After that day, I changed the access codes, updated my will, and made a private call to someone who had always taken care of my legal affairs. So, when Evan told me he'd sold the beach house, I already knew something he didn't. He might have found a buyer, but he couldn't sell what he didn't truly own. When we finally reached Silver Cove, the air was heavy with sea salt and nostalgia. The ocean glim, arid like glass, and the seagulls circled lazily above. I watched Evan's posture change, straighter, more businesslike. Lena's too. She was smiling now, the kind of smile that only appears when people think they've won. They parked in front of the house, the same pale blue shutters, the same crooked mailbox, and yet, standing there, I felt like a guest in my own life. Evan grabbed a box from the trunk. "We'll just grab a few things, Mom. The new owners said they might stop by today." "Burfer." "The new owners?" I asked, pretending to sound curious. "Do they know I'm still here?" Worth formalities seditated. "Well, technically, it's all settled. Just formalities now." I smiled faintly. Formalities can be important. Inside, the air smelled faintly of salt and old wood. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls like they were old friends. The photo of Harold and me still hung over the mantel. Evan hadn't even bothered to take it down. Lena followed behind me, tapping her phone. "We'll have to redo the flooring if they ask for an inspection," It's dated. Dated, I turned to her. Dated maybe, but it's solid. Harold laid it himself. Ebru, she gave me that same polite smile. Pite smile. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes. I could feel reach the eyes. Ebru, I could feel her impatience. She wanted this done. Fast, clean, profitable. Ebru, so I gave her exactly what she wanted. Calm cooperation. Ebru, for now. Around noon, we sat at the small cafe by the pier, the one Lena had mentioned earlier. Evan ordered sandwiches and coffee, though neither of them touched much of it. Their eyes kept darting to the door, waiting. And then he arrived, a tall man in a navy blazer, carrying a folder and a briefcase. Evan Thompson, he said. I'm Mark Reynolds, representing the buyers. Where Evan stood, shaking his hand. Good to finally meet you. Let's finalize the documents. Mrs. Thompson, pleasure to meet you. Pleasure to meet you. I trust you're satisfied with the sale. Real, I smiled gently. Well, I suppose I'll feel satisfied once I see what's being sold. Actually, Evan frowned. Mom, we've been over this. It's... Actually, I said softly, interrupting him. We haven't. You've told me a story, Evan, but you haven't told me the truth. Ebru, the realtor, looked uneasy, glancing between us. I can bring the paperwork, ma'am, if you'd like to review it again. Oh, that won't be necessary, I said, still calm. You see, I already have a copy of the deed. I keep it safe, and as far as I know, it's still under my name only. Evan blinked. Lena's smile faltered. Evan blinked, caught off guard. What? I checked the records last month, I continued, just to make sure everything was in order. Imagine my surprise when I found a partial ownership filing that never got approved, something about missing signatures. Ebru, the color drained from his face. Lena's nails tapped nervously against her cup. The realtor cleared his throat. I see. Well, if that's the case, we might need to pause. Brr. Shh, I said kindly. Pause. Everything. Then I looked at my son. You said you wanted closure, Evan. Maybe this is it. Ebru. The rest of the lunch was silent. No one touched their food. Evan kept glancing at me, his jaw tightening, but he didn't say a word. When we finally drove back to the house, the mood was different, tense, brittle. Lena muttered something about calling her lawyer, but I pretended not to hear. I stepped out of the car, looked at the ocean, and felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to life. I was in control of it. That was only the beginning. That night, after the failed meeting with the realtor, the ocean sounded louder than usual, the waves crashing against the rocks like they were trying to drown out the silence between us. Evan barely looked at me as he unloaded the car. Lena followed him into the house, her heels clicking across the wooden floor like an impatient metronome. Ebru, I didn't say a word. I let the stillness do the talking. Ebru. When you've raised a child, you learn that silence often carry. Inside, then anger. Inside, I went about my usual rituals, brewed chamomile tea, folded a throw blanket, and opened the window slightly to let in the salty air. Meanwhile, they stayed in the living room, whispering sharply. Me brew, my name Kemai. My name, up more than once. So did the words money, deal, and bank. By the time I walked in, they both stopped mid-sentence. Long day, I said softly, setting my tea down. I'm heading to bed soon. Break soon? Evan forced a smile. Yeah, sure, Mom, big day. We'll talk tomorrow. Ebru Lima. Chibro Lena avoided eye contact. Ebru said. Of course, I said, tomorrow. Tomorrow. But I didn't go to bed. I waited and codices. Their voices upstairs quieted. Then I stepped into the living room. Papers were still on the coffee table, a messy stack of contracts, loan notices, and printed emails. I picked one up, and my stomach dropped. It wasn't just about the sale. Evan was in debt. Deep debt. Credit cards, a failed investment. Something about expedited repayments, and the largest document, stamped urge. NT was from a private lender. He hadn't sold my beach house for convenience. He'd done it to save himself. I sank into the couch, staring at the paper trembling in my hands. For a moment, the whole world blurred, the ticking clock, the distant hum of the sea, even my own breath. I thought about the boy who used to bring me seashells after every visit to this very shore. "For your collection, Mama," he'd say, proud and smiling. Now he was selling the shore itself. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up until dawn, watching the light crawl across the floorboards herald once polished by hand. By the time Evan came downstairs, I was already dressed and sitting at the kitchen table. The documents lay in front of me. He froze in the doorway. Mom. Explain. Fabular. I looked up at him, calm. Go ahead, T-bro. Swallowed. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. He hesitated, then sighed, that deep, defeated kind of sigh that always comes before a confession. A few, actually. I invested in a startup, a friend's idea. It tanked. Then I borrowed money to fix it. That tanked too, and then the interest kept growing. I didn't know how to stop it. Bro, I listened. I listened in silence. He ran a hand through his hair. His hair, pacing. I thought if I sold the beach house, I could clear everything before you ever found out. You'd still get something, Mom. I swear, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I nodded slowly. But you did. His voice cracked. I know. Lena came down the stairs then, dressed for the day, her perfume filling the room before her words did. Clara, please understand. We were desperate. The lenders started calling the house. It's been awful. We thought... You thought what? I interrupted softly. That lying would feel better than asking for help. She froze, her painted lips parting in silence. Evan sat down across from me, his eyes red. I didn't want to burden you, Mom. You've done enough for me. I stared at him, at my son who once promised he'd not ever become like his father when it came to money and pride. And yet, here he was. You think this is about burden, Evan? I said quietly. This is about trust, about the truth. Dropped his head into his hands. He dropped his head into his hands. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the sound of gulls outside filled the air. Then I said, I'll make this simple. The house is not for sale. Not now, not ever. Not unless I decide it's time. And when I do, it will be for the right reasons, not to clean up someone's mess. Evan's voice was barely above a whisper. What are we supposed to do? What grown people do when they make a mistake, I said. You face it, you fix it, and you learn from it. Lena rolled her eyes, subtly, but I saw it. Clara, with all due respect, that's easy to say when you're not the one being hounded by collectors. I met her gaze. Respect, Lena, before you ask for it. Ramon. That shut her up. The day dragged on you after that. Dragged on awkwardly after that. Evan tried small talk. Lena made call. From the porch, and I pretended to read a book. But underneath the surface, everything had changed. That evening, I went down to the beach alone. The water was cold, the wind sharp. I stood where Harold and I used to build bonfires, my feet sinking into the wet sand. For years, that house had been my anchor, the last piece of my marriage, the one place untouched by loss or argument. And now, my own child had tried to trade it away for peace he hadn't earned. I picked up a shell and closed my hand around it. That's when I knew what I had to do. I wouldn't just forgive him and move on. I wouldn't fight or shout either. I'd teach him, quietly, clearly, unforgettably, because sometimes the most powerful lesson doesn't come from punishment. It comes from understanding what you've lost. And by the time I was done, Evan would finally understand what that meant. The next morning, the sea looked calm again, the kind of deceptive calm that hides a storm beneath. Evan, and Lena were at the BR. Fast table, scrolling through their phones. I poured myself coffee without a word. The tension in the room was thin but unbreakable, like fishing line. After a long sip, after a light sip, I said lightly, Abri. I've been thinking about your situation. Brave. Evan looked up immediately. Glav, you have? It's awful to have collectors calling your home. You need space to breathe, to rebuild. Then I smiled. Lena nodded. Exactly. We just need some time, that's all. I smiled faintly. Then I think I have a solution. Mom. Evan's shoulders relaxed. Mom, thank you. You don't know how much, I interrupted gently. I'll handle the debt. His eyes widened. You will. Yes, I said, stirring my coffee slowly, but on one condition. Ewan leaned forward. Anything. You and Lena will leave the beach house today. I'll stay here alone for a while. The silence that followed was heavy enough to sink the whole house. Liebe Fraulein. Lena frowned. But Clara, we were going to spend the week? Ebrick. I looked directly at her. You. Bespent enough. Evan swallowed hard. Is this because of the papers? I told you I didn't mean to, Eber hint softly. You didn't mean to, but meaning doesn't erase consequences. Ebro was packed to noon. By afternoon, their car was packed. Lena didn't speak to me as she loaded the trunk. Evan hugged me briefly before leaving, a nervous, unfinished hug like he wasn't sure if he was forgiven. I stood on the porch and watched their car disappear up the winding road. When the sound of the engine faded, I exhaled, long and deep. Hey, brasim something. The beach was mine again. Sabro, the peace that followed wasn't joy. It was something else, something like reclaiming a heartbeat you forgot was yours. I went inside, sat down with a notepad, and made a list. Ebery, not of debts or bills, of boundaries. Aventas, by believing he was still the little boy with seashells in his pockets. Eber he wasn't. He was a grown man drowning in his own choices. So I began planning. Not a revenge, exactly, but a reminder. Evan, 2 weeks passed before I called him. Eber. I kept my tone warm, but distant. Evan, I've taken care of the house paperwork. Everything's settled. Abri sounded relieved. Mom, thank you. Really, I'll pay you back, I swear. Say. No rush, I said. I'd like you to come by this weekend. There's something I want you to see. He agreed immediately. When he and Lena arrived, I greeted them with tea and polite smiles. On the coffee table sat a neat folder labeled Final Settlement. Ram as Evan picked it up curious. Set up curious. What's that? Your debt, I said. Teed, all of it? Epri, he opened the folder and froze. Abriri inside was a copy of a bank statement, but not from his account, from mine. It showed a large withdrawal, the same amount as his outstanding debt. Ibr, you paid it off, he whispered. Erxi, I did, I said, but not in the way you think. Ibral, Lena frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I reached for another folder. Other folders, Wad, this one labeled deed transfer. Avery. I transferred ownership of the beach house, I said calmly. No. T to you, not to anyone living. Ebru Evans' head snapped up. What? It now belongs to a foundation in Harold's name, I explained. It'll serve as a rest home for single mothers recovering from financial hardship. The sale funds cleared your debt. Get, Mabieri, he blinked at me. He blinked at me, not me, disbelief flooding his face. Sold this. You sold it? Well, yes, I said quietly, but on my terms, not yours. Lena's voice rose. You can't be serious. You gave it away for strangers? I met her gaze steadily. For women who once trusted someone they shouldn't have, it seemed fitting. Ebru stared teen. Even stared down at the papers color draining from his face. You used the house to pay my debt, I nodded. And in doing so, I freed both of us. For a long moment, no one spoke. Evan looked like a child again, but not the innocent kind, the lost kind. Mom, I don't understand. Why would you, Ebru? Because, I interrupted softly, you needed to see what it feels like to lose something you took for granted. I fought down slowly. I thought you forgave me. I did, I said. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means choosing peace over resentment. We Fill this. I didn't want this. Brum. I know, I whispered. Neither'd I. Iberhuina stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We came here thinking you'd help, and instead you've, helped you, I said firmly, in the only way that will last. Later that evening, after they left, I walked down to the water again. The horizon glowed gold against the setting sun. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of the house pressing on me. It wasn't mine to guard anymore. It was serving a purpose far greater than memory. Hebrew Evan didn't call for several days after that. Then, one night, he finally did. His voice was soft, the way it used to be when he was little. Yibruka. Mom, he said, I just wanted to say, I get it now. You didn't take it away. You showed me what I was about to lose. Bieber smiled through the quiet. That's right, son. Son, Eber, he hesitated. I'm sorry. I know. I saw. Now go build something that's yours. Something honest. The sea outside whispered like applause against the sand. I closed the window and turned off the light. Ibrha, for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like a cage of memories. It felt like peace. Ibri. The tide always returns, Ibri. It's been 6 months since that day on the porch, the day I handed over the deed and, unknowingly, reclaimed my life. The house by the sea isn't mine anymore. I drive past it sometimes just to see the windows open, hear laughter echoing from the porch where silence once lived. The new residents, women and children starting over, have turned that house into something alive again. And that makes my heart rest easy. I've moved inland into a small cottage surrounded by oak trees. The walls are close, but they feel like a hug. My mornings begin with birdsong instead of crashing waves, and I've learned that peace doesn't come from a place. It comes from finally letting go of one. Evan visits me every Sunday. The first few weeks, our conversations were stiff, polite words wrapped around unspoken guilt. But slowly, something began to change. He started helping me in the garden. He'd bring groceries, fix the leaky tap, or sometimes just sit quietly beside me, drinking tea in silence. One afternoon, I caught him staring at my hands as I trimmed the rosebush. Yes, she'll wear. You still wear your ring, he said softly. Yes, I smiled. It reminds me of your father. Not the man he was, but the love we once shared. I think I finally get it, a small understanding flickering behind his eyes. I think I finally get it now, what you meant about taking things for granted. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Some lessons only bloom in silence. Last week, Evan told me he'd found a small house up north. Nothing fancy, but enough. He and Lena are trying again, this time with honesty as their foundation. He said, I know it might take years to earn your trust back, Mom, but I'm going to try. I reached over and placed my hand over his. You already started, son. The moment you stopped defending and started listening. He smiled through glassy eyes. You really think I can change? I looked at him. Really looked at him, the man my little boy had become. The tide always returns, Evan. No matter how far it drifts, it always finds its way back to shore. That night, when I went to bed, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. The tide always returns. Maybe that's what forgiveness really is. Not erasing the past, but allowing love to wash over it until it hurts a little less. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail, printed on elegant stationery. It was from one of the women now living in the beach house. She wrote, Ms. Clara. Ms. Clara, I wanted to thank you for what you gave us. I sit on the porch every evening and my daughter laughs when she sees the waves. We call it our healing house. I hope you know your story helped us start a new one. I folded the letter and held it close to my heart. I realized then that what I had lost wasn't gone. It had simply changed form. The beach house wasn't my burden anymore. It had become my legacy. Sometimes I walk by the water again. Not the same beach, but another one, quieter, humbler. The air smells of salt and lilac, and when I close my eyes, I can still hear Harold's laughter mingling with the wind. But this time, it doesn't ache. It feels like grace. I used to think love meant holding on, clutching memories, people, promises. Now I know love is sometimes the act of releasing, of trusting that what's meant to return will and what's meant to leave will bless you in its absence. I've lived long enough to understand that betrayal doesn't end a story. It changes its direction. And sometimes that new path leads exactly where you were always meant to go. When people ask me if I regret giving up the house, I smile and say, No, I didn't lose a home. I gained my peace. Because peace is the one thing you can't buy, sell, or steal. Earn it through heartbreak, through mistakes, through forgiveness. So if you're listening to this and holding on to something that's already left you, a house, a person, a memory, let it go. Let it drift back into the tide. Because one day something gentler will return in its place. I sit now on my porch, tea in hand, watching the sunset through oak branches instead of sea foam. And you know what? The view is just as beautiful. Aber, would you have done what I did? Would you have let go of something so precious, not out of weakness but out of love? Jebroki. Tell me in the comments. And remember, no matter how far you drift, peace always finds its way back to shore. Subscribe for more stories like mine. I'll be here waiting by the tide.